Mark, I'd like to move into DPS,
Yes.
and it stands for Dynamic Purchasing System.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking now about National Police Dynamic Purchasing System, for short DPS. So how is DPS different from previous framework that we had, or some police forces still under current framework? And is there a website?
Okay, let's deal with the DPS first. So what makes a DPS different to a framework is that it's dynamic, which is the word that you've rightly said. So what that means is we can take suppliers at any time onto that framework if they're suitable. So if you look at, and I'm not criticising them, but the CCS and ESPO, they set a timescale for how long that framework will work under its current specification, and it might be 4 years. That means that companies can go on there, agencies can go on there for those 4 years, can't change. But because ours is dynamic, we could have a company that maybe didn't get on to start with, does what's required to meet our standards, and then can come on it a little bit later on, which is good for the police services, and it's good for interpreters who may be registered with that agency in particular. And then the second part of the question, I've forgotten.
What I asked you is whether there is a website. Where interpreters, practitioners can read or look at the DPS.
Yes, and, thanks for reminding me. So there will be, and I've been making this excuse for far too long, but it's absolutely true. You would not believe how difficult it is to find a web space on a police system, and it has to be on a police system. I spoke with someone last week who has shown me what it's going to look like. I've given them some of the detail that I want on that website. I hope that will be up and running early in November. I apologise to everybody that it's not there yet. I'm not making excuses. It will be there. And when it's there, it will have information on it like the authorised police practice. It will have signposting to all sorts of documents that interpreters and the police can use. Now, let me be specific. This website is for police officers, but I'm making it public facing. If it tells police officers how to do something, it makes sense for all of you interpreters and translators to read that as well, so that you know what we're expecting police to do. It also means if things aren't going right, you can get in touch with me and our contact details will be on it. It will be up and running soon.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Mark, this particular question, I know for the fact, because I was there when it was asked, and I know you answered this question before, but just for continuity and unfortunately or fortunately, this question keep coming up. I can see it still in the forum. Some practitioners still not clear. Which police forces under the this new DPS system?
None. So it's not gone, well, it's gone live, but every force in the country, apart from a few in the southwest, have got contracts already. So if we look at Kent Police, they have a contract with a supplier, and that runs until early next year. Once contracts start to get close to expiring, every police service in the country has said they will use it, except for the Metropolitan Police, who have their own arrangements anyway. So every police service is able to contract off the new DPS, but there'll be no change at the moment because everyone has contracts.
And is Met Police the only force that will not be under the DPS?
No. There's a few forces in Wales that have their own arrangements. Therefore, they don't need to engage with a major supplier because they have local arrangements. It might be with the local authority or some scheme that I don't know about, but they won't. It's not sure at the moment if Scotland will be joining us. I'm in talks with the Scottish Police. We think they will, but it's not confirmed. And also there are some small forces outside of the UK mainland, so Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man. It's unclear at the moment whether their specific needs are better met doing what they currently do. But when we look at the major forces, 43 forces in England and Wales, the majority of those will be using the DPS. They've given their support to it, which is why it was put together for police services.
You also mentioned Met Police and that they've got their own arrangement, and it does come up quite often in conversations and questions from the interpreters. What do you think is the difference between Met Police kind of versus other police forces? Why Met Police are able to have their own list and their own arrangements, and why perhaps you can elaborate on the fact that other police forces feel the need to have a different model for themselves.
Right, let me be clear. The Met Police have a language service provider. It's in-house. It's no different to any other force that makes a phone call, this time externally to an agency. A police officer in London arrests someone, needs an interpreter, they make a phone call to a language service provider. It just happens to be resourced by Metropolitan Police staff. They still do invoicing, they still do all the things that a language service provider, an agency, would do. The differences other than that are that in London there are so many people, visitors, residents, criminals that visit that don't speak English, that the Met Police are dealing with far more deployments a day than any other force in the country. Therefore, they also have larger amounts of money available to them through the Home Office, and they have decided that they can afford to run it in-house. But it's still a language service provider. They have the same rules that every other police service around the country have on the deployment, the qualifications, etc. They just are fortunate enough to have so much of a budget that they can do it internally.
This means that other police forces don't have enough budget to have the same model as Met Police.
Yes. So the Met Police has about 30 to 33,000 police officers, another 20,000 staff, civilian staff. So you're looking at 50,000 in that area. So a massive budget. When you look at Leicestershire with maybe 1,000 police officers, a much smaller budget, it's not profitable for the police service to employ people to do that job. So they have to outsource. And then we look at regions around the country where forces are brigading so that they can get economies of scale by procuring at a much larger scale. So they are doing what the Met Police are doing in one way. They're brigading their money so that they all work together and then they get a larger contract across a larger area.
By brigading, you mean like the forces, 7 forces in East region here? Is that sort of thing that you mean by brigading?
Yes, sorry, it's a police term, although it's a procurement term, I guess. But yeah, exactly right. There's 7 forces, and for those that don't know, we're now talking about Kent, Essex, Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Hertfordshire, Norfolk, Suffolk. Will procure all their services together, whether it's cars, uniforms, hand cleaner, masks. All of that is done on a massive scale because there's economies of scale. Those numbers of officers on those 7 forces still don't make up the same number as the Met. You can't imagine how big the Met is compared to any other police service. The only other force that comes close to it is New York in America.
So even despite the fact that forces are trying to join together or merge together, their budget still doesn't allow them to have in-house system like Met Police to deal with interpreting services.
That's correct. So if you're looking at a force like Kent that may have 400 deployments a month for face-to-face, when you look at how much it costs them to source those services externally from an agency, it saves them far more money than it would do to pay people to deal with the sourcing, the invoicing, the deployment. You have to pay those people not only their wages, but you have to pay national insurance, you have to pay them sick leave, you have to pay them a pension, etc. And when you add all those on costs, for most forces in the country, it's just not viable. And around the country, the National Police Chiefs Council has agreed that this is the way the police will procure using external agencies.
And how are the agencies selected for DPS?
There was a very, very stringent procurement process that my boss, Ian Fraser, dealt with. So this specification is put out, the requirement was put out there, and agencies could give their tender responses as to how they would be able to provide the services that the police require. That was marked, and I had no part in that at all. That was marked by panels of procurement people and police around the country, and scores were given, and I have no idea how they scored it. Many companies, agencies were rejected, and a small number were accepted as being able to provide what the police require. The next phase from that, if I can go on, is that I then went and audited every one of those organisations. I've been to see them all and checked that what they said they do, they actually do. And it's no different to when someone goes for an interview, so they've got a CV for their job, and the managing director will look at it and it says, you've done this, it says, you've done that. Well, when they come to interview, they're going to ask you about it, aren't they? Tell me exactly what you did, who did you talk to, how did that go, etc. And that's what I've done. And the way I've done it is that I have a qualification as an auditor, and I was a detective, and anyone who has a detective background can inquire into, you said this, now prove it. It's an evidence-based audit, and that's what we've done. Some companies have had to change some of their policies, procedures, etc. But overall, they're doing exactly what they said that they're doing.
You said that the selection of the agencies was done before you got the position that you're currently serving in.
No, it happened. It happened after I joined. So the process started in March, which was before I was there. The final selection happened, I think, in August. So I'd been there 2 months. But again, played no part in it, and I didn't see anyone's tender response until after they'd been accepted onto the framework. Once they'd been accepted onto the framework, I then saw their tender responses, so I could go through them and work out what questions I was going to ask and what evidence I was going to look for.